Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Aligned. Erin here, and today I am joined by one of my nearest and dearest friends, Mash. Mash and I met, it would have been, I want to say 4 years ago, perhaps, while we were both living in Indonesia. And we met at a mutual friend's wedding, but it took us a while to warm up to one another. We both have second line profiles. So I'm a 2-4 and she is a 6-2. And I think that's very natural with second lines. We often have this barrier of entry, and sometimes that can be perceived as a sort of shyness. In my case, a little bit more than Mash is, because Mash is also a pure manifesting generator with a very warm and open and enveloping aura. Whereas I think I lead a little bit more, especially with my somewhat intense projector penetrating aura. Needless to say, it took us a while to warm up to one another, but then in a turn of events that felt like divine synchronicity for us both. It's as if like we just got placed onto one another's paths and have never been the same since. We've surfed all over Indonesia together. We've met back up in Europe. And most recently, we spent about a month together surfing on a relatively remote island in Indonesia. And it was so nice after not really seeing each other for almost a year and a half, to just like lock back into our friendship and connect on a really deep level. And this conversation is definitely an extension of that. Mash made an appearance on this podcast a year and a half ago. And if you want to go back to that episode, it was episode 35. And that conversation was all about navigating emotional storms and how to stay grounded amidst the emotional intensity that often life throws our way, especially considering we both have defined solar plexuses, and a lot of our journey of finding kind of our own way and our own aligned path has been through learning how to work with and accept our emotions. So that was a really beautiful and raw conversation. And I think today's episode just expands on that or takes it a step further. So if that conversation was about staying with yourself in the intensity of the emotional wave, this episode speaks to why we find ourselves in that intensity and the patterns that kind of repeat themselves and show up in our lives, and what that intensity is here to show us. So Mash shares for the first time and goes deep into her process navigating the grief of her mother and losing her mother as an only child at such an early age in her life, and what that did to her and her psyche and her nervous system from such an early age, and the patterns that she then went on to replicate in relationships, in friendships, in intimate partnership, and how that process essentially kept inviting her to anchor and go deeper into her own healing and finding what it really means to cultivate self-love, and self-love beyond the superficial kind of spiritual bypassing approach to self-love. I think that through Mash's story that she shares so beautifully and eloquently and honestly, we get a real-time look into how grief and abandonment show up in our lives from a subconscious, like a very deep subconscious level, and the meaning that we assign to those experiences unconsciously, and how that drives patterns like chasing unavailable partners and abandoning ourselves and losing ourselves in connection. There's a big difference between knowing and actually feeling and healing something in the body. I think that for many of us who have been doing this work for a while, can probably understand ourselves from a very, very deep level. And we might know all of our patterns, and we might be able to look back at our past and, see the things that are holding us back. But then we wonder why we keep repeating these patterns, or why we still feel like we're stuck and we're not moving forward. And it's truly because healing happens in the body on a somatic level. We cannot think our way through healing. And this conversation really just unpacks that deeper. And both Mash and myself share how we go about that for our own processes. At its core, I think this conversation is really about shifting from how do I get through the storm to why do I keep finding myself here? And ultimately, how healing your relationship with yourself and changing the relationship that you have with yourself changes everything else. So I hope you all enjoy this episode with Mash, and I'll see you on the other side. I miss that room.
I miss you. It's so like weird without you here, to be honest.
I was about to say, you must be really lonely.
Yeah, I have no friends. Everyone left. My only friend.
I mean, if you think about it, like our routine, it was just so good.
It was on point, you know?
Yeah.
It was
Wake
great.
up 6 a.m., do our face exercises, and working with our fascia so that we can stay youthful and glowing.
But aren't we? Look at our faces.
Do you see these cheekbones? This chin? This
What's
is
this
natural.
jawline? No fillers. Yeah.
Go for a surf, have a coffee, do a couple of hours of work, go to the gym, do yoga, eat at 5:30, and go to bed.
It's so good, but I have to say, like, it's so much better to do it with someone. So you're welcome anytime. How's it being back in Chicago?
It's been really nice. I feel like
Yeah.
I timed everything so perfectly. Like the amount of time in Indonesia was perfect. Like I got everything that I needed out of it. Obviously, as you know, like I could have stayed for 3 months, right?
Hmm.
But it was enough. And then I feel like it gave me the perfect amount of time to be here to like lock in, to get everything
Mm.
ready for the retreat,
Hmm.
and to feel good and to feel like resourced and to feel not overwhelmed by it all. I think I would have had I
Yeah.
been in pretty much any other environment.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, that's nice then, everything just like was flowing, and maybe then it's a good thing your trip didn't get extended because everything just like was exactly how it needed to be. Yeah, because I feel like after
Yeah.
this, you're like stepping into a new chapter in a way. That's kind of what it
Yeah.
feels like for me to
And
witness you in that.
it's yes. And I'm going into it very like blind. Like I don't have a plan really after the retreat.
Mm, yeah,
And I feel like so many things are changing and so many things are up in the air.
right.
So I'm just not fighting the current. And, I think these lifestyles that we've lived have made us so good at just surrendering and like
Hmm.
letting the tides take us where they need to
Yeah,
go. And
yeah,
it's given me this appreciation to kind of be wherever it is that I am. And I've noticed this in if I look back at these last 2 years where I've been places that are not necessarily my place.
hmm,
For example, when I come here to Chicago,
yeah,
it's not my place. I've known this since the day I was born and had any cognizant awareness. And I can appreciate like the value of being here when I am here. And like I come here for a reason, and it's to kind of just hermit and to plan or to focus on like figuring out what my next step is going to be. Same with like being in Puerto Rico. It was always a really nice transition, and there were periods of time where it was challenging,
yeah,
but I feel like I've honed that muscle of being able to just be wherever I am and make the most out of it without like obsessing and going through the mental gymnastics of like figuring out what I should do to change whatever it is that I cannot change in the moment.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, you're not like rejecting where you are. You're just kind of, okay, I'm just going to lean in into the space that I'm in. And, you know, I know that I can't do anything about it. So I'm just going to make the best of it and actually like redirect my energy to something that I am able to contribute to or like control or,
Yeah. And what else is crazy, Mash, is it's been over a year and a half since we did our last podcast episode. That's how much time has passed.
oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah.
Damn, what did we talk about last time? I just remember saying unbecoming in that last episode.
Mhm. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it was all about like navigating the emotional storms. And I think both of us were able to provide our perspective on emotional intensity and what it means to be someone with a defined solar plexus and also just a human being, because all humans, like, we have to navigate the emotional experience, and it's a
Yeah.
natural chemical process that we cannot avoid. There will be the highs, there will be the lows. And so it was kind of a reflection, I think, from us both on accepting that part of ourselves and
Yeah.
navigating those emotional storms and holding ourselves through the emotional intensity.
Yeah.
And I feel like with this conversation now, obviously, almost 2 years later,
Yeah.
it takes all of that maybe a little step further and looks at, or like what we want to kind of talk about, or some of the intentions that we have is to look deeper into the patterns underneath some of that emotional intensity, especially as it relates to relationships. So going
Mm,
from how do I stay with myself during the storms to why do I keep finding myself in the storms to begin with?
yeah. And the image that I have in my mind literally is like, I yeah, like, last year or when we did our last podcast, it's like really facing the storms and just actually watching them happen and being there with them. And there's, yeah, like that acceptance of that it's actually happening. Whereas now there's such like comfort and stability, and I'd say almost like a level of groundedness in recognizing that the storm is there and that it's happening and just like being so okay with it while also recognizing like, hey, there are things that that I'm navigating through with this storm side by side, and it's just like all okay. You know, there's not this like experience that I used to have where I just wanted to run from it, hide away from it, suppress it, and like not even face it. Whereas now I'm like, let's just face it all head on. I'm like, this is where I'm at right now. It's like, what are the tools and what is it that I need to help me move through this? And like, what am I learning in this process? Um, yeah, so I think from this year in general, like the biggest one for me that I've realized that a storm that I think is like constantly alive in my life, like that's like in the background that I'm now learning to move through is literally the experience of having my mom die and like what that means for me and what that has meant for me. And it's interesting because before, like, that experience was very loud for me, and I went through my process of living in victim mentality towards that experience and also, like, using it in my favor to be something that I use as this thing to, like, get what I need, which is, like, not a really comforting thing to, like, look in the mirror and admit that to yourself. But now it's, like, on such a quiet level that it's not so much about now mom passing, but more so what that created for me in my life when it comes to relationships and the relationship that I have with myself. Oh, I feel like I'm standing at a base of a mountain for this one right now.
Yeah, I mean, having like witnessed you in your process, and obviously you and I have always kept in close contact even when we weren't on the same sides of the world, but
Yeah.
you've definitely had like a pretty extreme transformation over particularly the last 6 months with this. And I mean, if you're open to sharing more about, again, that grief and that process, but I still also remember meeting you, and obviously at the time that we met and connected, we were both already really, really deep into our own processes of healing and self development. And you had even studied counseling and
Hmm.
trained in it. And it's not like any of this was very new to us. But in many ways, I feel like when it came to you sharing about the grief that you carried or your mom's passing, it it's almost as if you kind of would skip over it a little bit,
Mm,
or it was, yeah, it was something I noticed that you didn't really want to get your hands into. Um and we would obviously go very deep into so many things,
yeah.
but it's only recently that I feel like you really actually, like, in your body, opened up to processing the experience of like what that did to you.
Whoa.
And I think maybe also at the time too, you weren't ready to, and this is the way I also see it. When it comes to healing, it's like we all have pain, we all have trauma, we all have things that we're carrying. And over time, our nervous system develops these very, very strong bodyguards whose sole job is keeping those vulnerable parts of ourselves that have been so brutally hurt at some point in our lives, to keep them protected. And those bodyguards are so strong. They have such big muscles. They're so intimidating looking. And they don't want us to have to go to that place of pain
Yeah,
because they don't see that as being safe. And
exactly.
I think that, especially, like, we're not always ready to go there. And we have to slowly chip away. And the image that always comes to mind for me, or recently has been coming to mind to me,
Hmm.
is, remember when we were in Sumbawa and we were
Hmm.
getting it's rainy season when I was there. So there were all these huge storms coming through. And so
Yeah,
every day I'm getting on the radar and I'm looking to see, like, are there any circling, swirling tropical storms, cyclones nearby? And you can kind of zoom out the map and you see all these like hot spots over the map. And I almost think of like each of us is our own map. And we all have these like pulsing storms. Some are closer, some are further away, some are bigger, some are smaller. And as we go through the process of healing, doesn't matter what aspect of our lives, but just healing, all of those, it's as if all of those little storms get a little bit smaller, and all of those
mm,
storms get a little bit smaller, until we get to a point where some of those big ones that we never would have been able to survive had they come to us, those become just manageable enough that they can come to our shores and we can navigate and weather those storms. So maybe for you, again, it was that big thing that was swirling for so long that required so much time and care and attention for your body to feel safe enough to actually like lean into what you needed to see there.
yeah, I think you definitely nailed it. Just even from the beginning when you talked about how I never really leaned in into talking about it. I think that the way that it resonated in my body, that it just felt really uncomfortable. Like I felt so uncomfortable to share or talk about it or to even like bring it to the table because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to share something so heavy. I didn't know if I was going to be held. I Yeah, I was just so emotionally walled off and like disconnected from that because yeah, like sharing that requires for me this like level of vulnerability, and I don't think I was connected to that at all at that point, whereas now I feel such a different connection in actually sharing that story and of like what actually happened. And of course, it took years of like peeling back layers and learning and understanding things about myself. Where I think now in these last few years, it really came down to like the core of what it is. Cause I just see this core wound so clearly right now. But I'm still noticing that there's still things in my subconscious that are still being kind of presented to me every day. And all of those things that are being highlighted or like the holes that I'm starting to poke are all related to the relationship that I have with myself. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you want me to like fully go into the story? Because I'm totally open and like prepared to. and we could just go from there.
Yeah. Perfect.
Or yes, all right. So, yeah, the big story was mom passed away from a brain aneurysm when I was a little kid. And so the day before that, my grandma, dad, and mom were like celebrating because my dad had helped somebody get their visa to Australia to move countries. And we got a really nice chunk of money from that, which then they were celebrating that, like, hey, we are going to apply for our visa to move to Canada. You know, like we were like ready to make the big move as a family. And yeah, the next morning, mom woke up and she went for a run with her best friend and my dog Greta, and they were just running on the track. And her best friend noticed that something was wrong, but mom was always like, "Oh no, like I'm fine." But then she started to feel like that she wasn't all fine, and she like kind of barely made her way home. And dad and I were home that day, and we were just like sorting through old like VCR movies, like in just organizing the house, like playing whatever. And we saw that mom is starting to come home, so we're like, hey, like let's play a joke on her and like hold the door closed so she can't come in. And yeah, when she started to walk up the stairs, like I was already like really happy and excited and like ready to go, and like we were always like playing tricks and stuff like that on each other. And when mom came to the door and like tried to like open it, um my dad notices something was wrong with her, and then she's like tried to open the door again as we were like, holding it closed, and she actually just like fell over. And then dad like immediately was like, oh god, and picked her up and carried her up the stairs. And I just remember him saying, Masha, Masha, like stay down here. And then he carried her up the stairs, and after that I was like, I knew that something was wrong. And so yeah, we had to like get the ambulance and um get called, but she basically went into a coma right there and then, and she just basically barely made it back. And I just remember as a kid, I there were so many emotions when you're like 5 or 6 years old that I just didn't understand what happened in that moment. And I was desperate for her. I was desperate for her in so many ways that I just wanted her to like give me some kind of sign or clue that she was alive. And I remember I would even like lie to my grandparents and like my dad and my family, being like, oh no, mom's fine. Like she would squeeze my hand and stuff like that. But she never did any of those things. I just needed to like, I don't think I've ever actually admitted this to anyone before. So this is like a new, yeah, I wanted to make something real of that she still loved me or that she was still around, and I just needed to hear something from her, but I never did. And so, yeah, she ended up being on life support for a couple weeks. And back in the day, we didn't have specialists in Canada, I mean, in Ukraine, that were able to do the surgery that she needed or anything like that. So dad had to make the call, and he made the call to take her off life support, which mean that she wasn't going to make it. And yeah, it was interesting to have this conversation with him this year because he still carries that, and I see that. And I also see how this year I was able to reprocess her passing away as an adult this time, and actually just see that her dying had nothing to do with whether she loved me or not. And so it was like such a clear separation of like, hey, she actually just had something going on and it had something to do with her, and that's why she left. It wasn't because she didn't love me or that I wasn't lovable or she didn't want to be my mom or anything like that, or all of these things that I've created in my mind that like registered for me as a 5-year-old that then just created this whole entire string of how my life was moving forward, and this like common theme in the relationships of being with people who just vanished, ghosted, disappeared, or just this burning desire that I have sometimes that is registered so deeply within me to make somebody love me or to like get something out of somebody that
Mm.
actually doesn't want anything to do with me. And it has nothing to do with me. It's just like they're going through their own shit. So it's been confronting, it's been beautiful, and it's been really hard. And it's been a very when I say like I'm standing at the base of the mountain right now, it's like I'm literally standing at the base of the mountain of understanding of like, hey, how do I not lose myself in a relationship? How do I still be vulnerable and love? And how do I show up for myself? And how do I like nurture this young mash that's inside of me that has literally felt abandoned her whole entire life, you know? And so
Yeah.
that's like the work that's been happening. Whereas I think previous years and previous life to that, it's that wound has created so many other wounds and so many other layers of pain and ways that I showed up in friendships and relationships towards my life from this like lack of knowing of how to respect myself, how to respect the people around me, how to communicate. And so I feel like going into counseling and stuff, I've really peeled back all of the layers. And at one point I thought, oh, I'm actually in a really good place. And I mean, I was, and I am, but now I'm recognizing that, wow, I feel like the real work is like starting now, you know, and it's like working on the most important relationship that I'm ever going to have, which is with myself. And before, I didn't really that really didn't click for me. You know, I was like, oh yeah, self-love, sure, bubble baths and reading books and, you know, being kind and gentle with yourself. And like inner child work was like, okay, sure, yeah, there's an inner child, but there's such a different connection to that now and what that means and what that actually looks like, where I feel like I've actually like broke through a wall where I can access those parts of me and recognize that there is that child within me, and I am aware when she comes online. Or I think something that I'm still learning is when it comes to relationships and learning of like, hey, how am I abandoning myself and how am I not showing up for, with myself in this moment? Because I feel like the most recent connections that I've had have really played out this like almost exact scenario of showing up in my life and having so much shit going on with themselves and just not have the availability or the capacity to hold me, you know? But it's like learning to not take that take that to mean anything bad about me. It's just accepting like, hey, this person isn't available. So am I going to have the self-respect within myself to be like, hey, this actually doesn't fly with me because I don't feel good in this, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm now learning how to walk away and what that looks like. And yeah, I guess it's like partly walking into the unknown, but also walking away from this um I, yeah, I guess this like learned pattern of what it feels like to be abandoned, where there's almost like comfort in that. And so, like, putting that down and then recognizing and learning all over again of like, hey, what does it actually mean to be loved? And also standing strong within myself to be able to show up for me and to choose something that's not actually going to cause pain, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for sharing. And
yeah.
I mean, I haven't heard and most of that story at all. Um, so
Yeah.
I'm glad you feel comfortable sharing. And yeah, it's incredible the work that you have done.
Mhm.
And it's not an easy feat. Like what you went through is brutal. And you are doing what many people don't do, which is
Mhm.
the very uncomfortable and the very challenging and confronting work of looking at the impact that that has had on you and choosing differently. And I think what you very like eloquently described in your own experience is how we don't always, when it comes to relationships, our external relationships always mirror our internal relationships. And what we attract is not based on like what we cognitively want.
Yeah.
It's based on what's familiar to us.
Yeah.
And until we can change what's familiar, and until we can change the relationship that we have with love, starting with ourselves, our external relationships are never going to change either. And so I would love to hear from your perspective, like, because it's kind of going off of what you also shared, like we can only take it so far, this work, when we're just doing it on our own.
Yeah.
And we require like the next level is always going to be mirrored to us through intimate relationships specifically, as soon as we start opening ourselves up to others, because that requires vulnerability. And that's when those broken, really hurt, really grieving parts of ourselves that still exist, the 5-year-old that's still living and breathing inside of you because she never had an outlet to actually move that grief through her.
Mhm.
Like all of a sudden, she is out in the open again.
Yeah.
And the intensity that that brings and the emotions that it brings up can be so heavy. And so I'm curious for you, like, how these last few exchanges and relationships that came into your life kind of helped point you in this direction.
Yeah. So the very first time that that happened to me was actually just at the end of last year and in the start of this year. So it was right after when I left Zimbabwe and had my time in Australia. And I think I was just finally ready to see what the connection for what it really was. And there was just honestly, for that specific moment, there was just like an inner knowing, like an inner intuition that was just telling me like something is wrong, something is not going well here. And I started to, I think just being more aware of myself, I started to see, I'm like, huh, these are like the same patterns that are coming online. I'm like, why am I getting so triggered of not being able to like talk to this person every single day? Or like, why am I being so triggered by this silence? And then I I don't I'm gonna admit that I used ChatGPT for this one, but I was like, in that moment, I was like, I just needed something to help me go a little bit deeper in my thinking and to like reflect things back to me. So I just asked it to like ask me questions to help me dig a little deeper. And eventually it brought it brought up like a thing with like the situation with my mom. And in that moment I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let myself say and like literally blurt out everything, like stream of consciousness that's coming up. It doesn't even need to make sense. And yeah, this situation with my mom came up and I just genuinely felt this like energetic something like unlocked inside of my heart space, that almost like something came into place and like it like unlocked and then locked in. And I just was like bursting tears. And the world just makes made sense in that moment, and that was the first experience I've ever had where I felt little Mash in that moment, and I was like, "Holy shit." I'm like, She's been here this whole time." I literally have goosebumps as I'm saying this, and it
Me
was
too.
like this
Me too.
and it was like this energetic experience where I literally just laid in bed and cried and I hugged myself and I just saw myself hugging my little Mash, where I was just able to like pick her up for the first time and be like, holy shit, I'm so sorry. Like I love you so much. I cannot I understand, you know? And then that was when the in my mind it just finally understood for me. I was like, this her death meant nothing about me. Like it had nothing to do with me because the current like relationship situation that I was also in that moment had nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing. And so through that experience I was able to like move through that relationship and that connection, just seeing that like, huh, it has nothing to do with the fact that like I'm unworthy of this love or that this person doesn't care about me or doesn't love me or anything like that. It just became so much deeper for me. And and then it kind of it unlocked something for me, but I think that I didn't drop in and do this like deep work up until I actually got to see you and we did the breath work. Because breath work, the 9D session that we did, I think you kind of offered that to me when I was in Canada. We're like, oh, maybe we'll try this in Zimbabwe. And then we just kind of whatever. And then I think it was like conversation here that came up that you had to do a session. And then I was like, I was like, we did talk about this. And I started to like feel this like curiosity. I'm like, maybe I do want to try this. Like, because I've always been very not like, I'm like, whatever, breath work. And it's funny enough, like I studied holotropic breathing. Like I did like 3 months of intensive breath work every day as a facilitator and as a client. And I just like not, I was like, yeah, whatever. And then, yeah, this time around when we did it, I really felt like I was ready for something like that. And something that I think helped me also to drop in was I did a training session before we did the workout, right? And I did like a plank, and then for some reason I did the plank and I just started crying, and I feel like that just like helped me open and just be more present with my body. So when we did this breath work, it was like I was in immediately. And to this day right now, Erin, like I'm so grateful for you for that experience because it was just absolutely mind boggling changing. And I still to this day don't actually have words to describe what I experienced, except for like the fact that I'm like, I think I died and came back. I've never felt anything like I did through that 1 hour, even in times when we've done like plant medicine and things like that and mushrooms and whatnot. Cause like those are way longer journeys. This was like literally within like an hour of the emotions and the sensations that I felt in my body and like the depth of where I went to like come back from that. I was like, whoa. I literally felt like I just traveled to a different dimension and then came back. And within that, there was so much that I saw and witnessed and went back to in my life. And yeah, it was just like the felt experience in my body to like fully surrender to whatever was happening in that moment and just have this trust that I will come back and that I will be able to be in this like 3D world again, you know? But yeah, I felt like that was just residual emotion and work that needed to be released out of my body and my connection to like my menstrual cycle and being a woman and just trusting in being a woman and in that feminine because I think that mom passing as well has also created this huge like lack of trust that I have in just trusting in the feminine, trusting in being soft, trusting in just surrender and leaning in because I think I led my life from a place of like I need to have control at all times. I need to be put together. I need to have a plan and I need to be able to rely on myself. Like I don't have to rely on anyone else. Like all I need is myself. Where like, yeah, that's beautiful, but I'm just like was fully missing this like piece of, but like, what about being soft and gentle and nurturing and being kind, which is like everything that I feel like I missed out on, I think. Which is what I'm now learning all over again, you know?
Yeah.
Because yeah, even after that like breathwork experience, it was like it wasn't, oh Mash, you need to go and do more of this like self-development work. It's like, no, like all you need to do is just like be with this and like hold yourself. Like that's it. you know? So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just like kudos to you. Like, this is not easy work. And you have moved through this, I think, with such beauty and grace and resilience. And yeah, healing is a process that happens in the body. It
Mhm.
is not something that we can think our way to. And for those who are listening, also, there's a couple things that throughout your story that were like, just like giving me things that I wanted to share on.
Please,
One
please
of
do.
which, one of which was, you talked about how your mom passing, she didn't pass because she didn't love you, and how anyone listening might think like, yeah, obviously I know this bad thing didn't happen to me because like I know it wasn't a conscious choice for my parent to leave me or for my parents to get divorced. That's one. But you have to remember this is like a 5-year old, a 6-year old, a 7-year old, a child who doesn't have an awareness and an understanding of their world and how relationships work and what death even means. All we
Mhm.
know is that we are vulnerable and we are unprotected, and we rely on our caretakers to provide us with unconditional love and safety. And trauma, which again, like people hear that word sometimes and think that it has to be this like big T, like your mom dying or abuse, like,
Yeah.
but trauma is simply an overwhelm of energy in our bodies and in our systems. And that trauma gets stuck or stored when at that time we don't have a way to discharge that energy. And the things that are required to discharge that energy is a safe and loving caretaker with with a regulated nervous system who can basically co-regulate for us, because at that age we have not developed enough to be able to regulate ourselves. So we require someone else to help us regulate.
Mhm.
And you can look back at your environment and, you've done so much work on your relationship with your father. And you've also been able to see how, like, your father is still existing as his, like, protected self or as his inner child. And he's just going through his own battles. And at that point in time, he just lost his wife and the mother of
Mhm.
his child. And he couldn't be that safe space for you to discharge and regulate and express that grief. So it got stuck and it got stored inside of you, you
Yeah.
know? And that's why it's like we have these inner children and these vulnerable parts of us that are oftentimes like in the driver's seat of our life, or these protective parts, the one who says, I can do it all myself. I've got control of this. I don't need anyone. Like, those are all these parts that our nervous system has developed to keep us safe and to keep those vulnerable parts safe from having to experience that pain that they've been avoiding or trying to not to do something with.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who are often in the driver's seat and dictating our lives and driving us in directions that aren't in full alignment with like our deep desires and our true self. And the only way we can get to the healing is through the body, right? And so much of everything that you just shared of your process, like, it wasn't a logical process at
No.
all. It required like actually cutting yourself off from this part and feeling and moving and breathing and expressing, and the liberation that then creates, and the relationship it builds between yourself and those different parts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, beautifully put, Erin. I think that you just like summarized probably the one of the most important things, you know? It's like we can logic make things logical until the cows come home. You know, you can understand something on like an analytical level for as much as you want, but as long as we continue on that path without actually connecting the bridge between the mind and the heart and the body and our spirit, then in a way I'm like that work almost doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, sure, you're not going to get as triggered, but like the emotions are still there. They're still going to be stored in your body as pain or cancer or whatever, you know. It's like they're just going to continue living in that in the body until somebody like pokes the body at some point and it's like, ah, there's something there, you know, and then you just don't even know what to do with that. So I think that our healing really is about, yeah, like understanding things, and maybe that can create some kind of safety at some point, which maybe that's what it did for me, is like it created like a safety and understanding where I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to like drop in into the body. And it's not that I know what's going to happen, but I know I'm well prepared to understand and not to like flood, you know, because this no longer takes the driver's seat in my life, you know. And then when it does, it's like there are tools and ways that I know I'm like, okay, I need to like meditate or journal or like do something to like get out of here so I can continue to live my life from this place.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot as well. And I think as someone who has always been very up here, and like I have a very, very, very strong mind, and one of the protective parts that I've created that, again, is like often in the driver's seat trying to keep my little part safe, has always
Mhm.
been like very logic oriented, very like I'll notice, I'm always trying to understand things, or I can be really defensive when that protective part is in the driver's seat. And it's very, very up here. And so I have also found understanding how this whole relationship between the mind and the body, and between trauma and our emotions and the nervous system, understanding has created a little bit of space for that protective part to kind of relax and lean back a little bit so that I can get into my body. But for a very long time, I, as I started my healing journey, I couldn't access my body.
Mm,
I knew from a cognitive level that I had work to do. And I could even go back to say, like, okay, these are some of the things that happened growing up that affected me and are probably carrying over into certain patterns now. But I
yeah.
had no ability to get to, and I think you can relate too. It's also why you weren't able to really get deep beneath the grief that you knew was there. Because again, it's like those protective parts are really good at their job.
Yeah.
And we have to find our own way of working before we can ever get to the inner child or those like vulnerable parts. We first have to go through the protector and find a way to ease their grip from the steering wheel and talk them down a little bit so that we can get to the heart of it, right? Those real vulnerable wounds, the parts of us that simply just, and most of the time, too, the actual work is like, it's not about fixing them or changing what happened. It's just letting them know that you're there
Yeah.
and being reparenting ourselves, being what we didn't have for ourselves.
Yeah.
We are the ones who co regulate that inner child with our now regulated nervous systems so that they can discharge that energy.
Yeah. Fully. What do you think some of the tools that have helped you in that?
I think there are obviously like the one that is the most impactful and has had the biggest impact for sure is breath work.
Mhm.
But I will say there were certain things that were incredibly valuable to even get me to a point of being able to do breath work and to get anything out of breath work.
Yeah.
And they seem maybe a little bit unrelated, but they were really helpful in me building a greater capacity in my nervous system to
Mhm.
go to those deeper places. So I think it started with yoga. I started practicing yoga when I was still in college. And I
Yeah.
started it initially as like a physical practice. It was when I was getting ready to retire from competitive sports and needed something else to do. But what that started doing was changing the relationship I had between my mind and my body, allowing me to slowly develop this like awareness muscle and this presence muscle.
Mhm.
But again, that took years. And meditation was also helpful, but helpful in the sense that, again, I started being able to work with my mind a little bit better,
Mhm.
but I still always needed, like, I needed something deeper to get me into my body. Um, ecstatic dance, I spoke about this on another podcast a few weeks back. One of those things that I had so much resistance against, it was when I first was in Bali right before the pandemic, and my friend Kahena brought me to one, and I knew that I needed to go because I was so uncomfortable about the idea of it, and I had
Mhm.
so much resistance, and oh my gosh, my whole body was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna throw up. I cannot do this. Be sober and dancing in front of people." And it really, like I said, like, helped me build the capacity in my nervous system um to and it took a couple of those. I did it a few times to like and it gave me so much liberation in my body. I still say that's one of the best practices I've done next
Mhm.
to breath work.
Wow.
Plant medicine has been helpful, but I will say it how it's been helpful, I'm not sure. I know that it has, but I haven't
Mm.
ever gotten like really clear, tangible outcomes or like even directive from it. And I know some people really do.
Yeah.
But it's always been a bit more of a challenge for me, which is why I always come back time and time again to breath work, specifically 9D breath work, which
Yeah.
you now know
Yes.
why I
Yes.
have been preaching that, why I incorporate that into everything that I do, my retreats,
Yeah.
my coaching containers, because it is one of the most effective ways to bypass the mind, work with the body, somatically
Yeah.
move what needs to be moved, and actually give us not only a release, but also closure
Yeah.
and really being able to imprint a new level of like safety into our bodies again.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
What about for
Yeah.
you have been like some of those tools and practices that have helped you?
Mm, yeah, I think for me, the biggest one in my life has always been journaling. Um, and it was either writing poems or just journaling about whatever. I think the poetry was a big one when I was feeling a lot of pain and like despair and the grief. And I think that's when I was able to like really tap into this like emo poems about how I was feeling about everything. And then the journaling itself was actually something that the practice in itself was challenging at first because I was still trying to like scripted in how I was writing. And I just felt this like block that I was like, I couldn't actually say what I was feeling. And so through practicing that, I was able to actually just allow the stream of consciousness to like come through, which I think built a bridge in some way. And yeah, and writing a lot of letters, writing letters to my mom, writing letters to my dad, writing letters to myself, writing letters to my body, writing letters to Little Mash, yeah, just like letters. And I think like through those conversations, that's when I started to become more comfortable in admitting things out loud after when I was able to admit them to myself. And yeah, I think the big one for me was also going to school for becoming like a counselor. And some of the most impactful modules or semesters that I've had were in emotional and physical wellness. And yeah, the big one was we had like psychotherapy, and this was when we would like go and relive a traumatic moment in our life and like bring it to completion. So that's when I really learned and understood that like, okay, it's really important to like close the loop and like bring the circle to completion on like a physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental level. It's not just mental that has to come to completion. It has to be on all levels. So it like clears that pathway, and creates the flow in life. So yeah, I think that really created a base for me, and it created like a really, really strong foundation for the work that I am doing now. And I guess afterwards, like there are things like the yoga and the meditation that came on, but it just for me, it more so just became like a tool, like a wellness tool. And with the plant medicine, in a way, I would agree with you that it was very hard. It was very intense on the body. And I would say that probably psilocybin was a lot more powerful for me than ayahuascas and stuff. Um, in a sense that, in a way, every single journey has brought me closer to myself. Like there was some kind of like self love, feeling a connection to and being one with the earth, one with everyone in the world. So I think it was more like a very spiritual experience, if anything. Yeah, I'd say like those are the tools, but I will probably go that journaling has been my anchor for as long as I can remember. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I would have to agree with that as well, and starting with poetry for me.
Yeah.
Well, not starting necessarily, but I very similarly, and I wonder if it's also like a defined solar plexus just being like a very emotional, being, but that was a huge unlock for me when
Yeah.
and it was like it just I've never experienced that like creative download like I
Yeah.
have because words for me, that is my form of creative expression. It's always been words, it's been storytelling, it's been and you and I, it's funny like having such different designs, you being a pure manifesting generator, me being a projector. We still have so many commonalities um within our design with the 1333 channel and the 2443, a lot about again storytelling, throat communication, articulation,
Yeah.
simplifying things.
Yeah.
But yeah, poetry for me was like a really really big one that then led to a lot more. And it wasn't just poetry, it was also sharing my poetry publicly that for me provided so much healing, because it goes back to again like shame, and how when we hold and harbor all of this pain inside of us and we tag it as being bad,
Yeah.
then it festers like a mortified wound inside of us, whereas the moment that we allow it to actually like be expressed, it turns into beauty, it
Yeah.
turns into art.
Yeah.
And that was so liberating to like allow myself to be seen in that way. And it also
Mhm.
was a little bit safer because I could be very poetic and elusive in a way without actually saying, like, I have a fear of abandonment and people always leave me and this is what's happening. But like, that's basically what my poetry was saying in a really beautiful, beat around the bush kind of way. But it was
Yes,
my
yes.
first way of like owning that.
Yeah, yeah, fully. I fully resonate with that as well. Actually, as you say that, I'm like, yeah, I've spoken a lot of my letters out loud, you know, and there is something beautiful about being witnessed and being seen and being recognized in your emotion, because it doesn't really matter whether, say, if you're writing the poem or the letter about somebody, they don't have to be in that room for your body to still be able to move through something in that moment, because our minds and our bodies, like, more so like our body can't tell the difference, you know? So it's like when you're there and you are sharing the full expression of what you're experiencing, and there's people that come to mind, or the situations, whatever, it's like that exists in the present moment for the body. And when
Yeah.
we give it that space to be said out loud and to be moved through us while also being witnessed and being held in that, that's where the healing actually happens. Like that's where there's that completion that also begins to like transform, you know, because we're giving it space, we're allowing for something to move through our body. So it doesn't always have to be so fucking cathartic or like insane all the time, you know, it can actually just be very like gentle and beautiful and nurturing as well. So, yeah, I really stand behind that practice, and even like to my friends now, or people that I'm talking to that are experiencing any kind of grief or something that is left unsaid or something that is left unexpressed, I'm like, write a letter. And then I always offer up to be a space, and I'm like, you can always read it to me, because like that also helps so much in like the healing process, in like closing the loop and like moving something through the body, because like it doesn't matter, the person doesn't have to be in the room, because it exists in your body in the present moment, and that's what we're trying to work with. We're trying to like tap in into what's actually present in the body. And I think that's what we also talk about, like when we're in our head and we're so logical in our minds, is because our minds just want to protect us and keep us away and distract us. You know, it's like, what else can I be doing? You know, we're freaks. We're like scrolling social media, distract, distract, distract. But when we talk about like dropping into the body, it's like, hey, we drop into the body means that we're dropping in into the present moment. And if in that present moment you're feeling anxious, uncomfortable, sad, I'm like, there's something there that needs to move. So let's make the space for it. Like, you know, I would even suggest like, oh, if you're feeling so bored, and I feel like I hear this one so often, like people are like, oh, I'm so bored, I need to do something, or I'm so anxious. It's like, okay, write a letter to that. Talk about it. Like, why not just like actually sit with it and be like, hey, what is actually happening in my body right now? And like that's already creating that small bridge, or like one step closer towards yourself. So it doesn't have, like I said, like it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be cathartic. You could start small, as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the accumulation of those baby steps, those micro moments that actually lead up to the bigger transformation. And again, it's in this like encoded in our human nature to want to have the easiest route, right? We have like laziness that's just in our genes. It's how do we get to the outcome with the least amount of energy because that's the best for survival. And it causes us to lose faith too early or to give up too
Mm,
soon or to not see the value in the small wins. And it really is from like a scientific perspective what we're actually doing in our bodies when we create those micro moments, when we have those periods of pause, when we can take a step and like write that letter, is you
mhm.
truly are expanding the capacity for your nervous system to hold the life that you desire. And and you know, even with like a breath work, a meditation, all these like little things that you can be doing, oftentimes we go to them when we're in the height of our discomfort. I'm so anxious right now, like I just want something to get rid of it. And so yeah,
Mhm.
maybe then finally when we're in the pits, we'll say like, all right, I'm going to do this nervous system regulating tool, and we might get a little bit of reprieve, but then the anxiety's still there. And so then we
Yeah.
say, oh, this shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
But it really is about the compounding effect of any bridge that you can make, any pause that you can take. It builds off of the last, and it builds off in the last, and it builds off until the last, until you realize like the heavy parts aren't as heavy any longer. The
Yeah.
emotional lows don't last as long as they used to. But you
Yeah.
have to keep up the discipline and you have to keep up the practice, because that's an act of devotion and of self love, of showing your parts that you won't abandon them, that you will
Yeah.
continue to be there for them. And that's the healing.
Yeah. Well said, sister. Yeah.
So what's next for you? Like what do you feel like this has all created space for you around, and where do you hope to take it?
Ooh. So I think that where I would like to take it is I really want to grow deeper into understanding of how I can be there for myself, and I think that at this point I still feel like I'm scratching the surface. And earlier you said that our outside is a reflection of what's going on inside. And I think that that's where the work comes in for me, because I still think on a deeper subconscious level, there are still things that, or places where I'm still vibrating at a certain frequency that is really still attracting and like reflecting to me that I'm not quite over this grief that's there, or this belief of not being abandoned. So that's something that I would like to work through and process that fear. So then I can, yeah, drop deeper into being able to like manifest and go after the life that I want, whether it be in work, in relationship, in business, um, and just how I lead my life. I think that I've come to a place where I'm ready to take it to the next level, and to, yeah, just to see where that takes me as well. I think I'm still quite fresh in that chapter of my journey. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'm very happy to be on this journey with you.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening who would want to keep in touch with you or get to
Mhm.
know you more, where's the best place to find you?
My definitely my Instagram. It's at mash is free. Um, that's where I sometimes post and sometimes not post. But yeah, that's where you can get in touch with me, learn more about my story, connect with me. And if and when I start to share more about what I'm up to, that's also where you'll find all of that. So,
And I will say, Mash is the best listener for the design nerds who are listening. She has Gate 13 and her son, her conscious son. And if you just ever, need a really good listening ear, I very much recommend reaching out to Mash because she gives great advice and she's a great listener.
oh my gosh, Erin, I love you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to like share space with you and to reconnect with you. And again, I've shared this with you before, but I'm going to share it again. Like, you've really helped transform something within me in this journey, especially recently, to be able to have our paths cross again, and for you to really give me the gift of breath work and what that did for me. I'm eternally grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you. I love you so much.
I love you so much too.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening and for being a part of this community. I feel like I know so many of you quite intimately who do listen and tune into this podcast, and many of you I haven't had the pleasure of interacting with yet, but I do hope that changes at some point in time, because it really means so much to me to make this space feel like a home, and I hope that it does for you. I hope you feel seen by these episodes. I hope you feel validated, and I hope that they give you a sense of hope, of purpose, of belonging, and push you to connect deeper to yourself. And my goal for all of the work that I do, my dream, my purpose, my mission is to empower all of you to make your lives your own, to make you your main character, to feel like you are inspired by the life that you're living, not by other people's necessarily. And all of these conversations are meant to be, yes, of course, a source of inspiration, but to also empower you to see what's possible for your own life. And I just want to take a moment to speak a little bit to my process, because as you may have heard on this episode through some of Mash's reflections on the work that she's done with me, healing is very multidimensional, and we cannot work in silos. We cannot simply work on our mind, go to talk therapy, do cognitive behavioral therapy, and expect our lives to change. The same way we cannot just go and immerse ourselves in intense plant medicine ceremonies and also expect something in our lives to change. And that's why I've dedicated so much of my work to really working with all elements of our human experience. I always start with human design, right? So much of this podcast is about showcasing human design in action and highlight people who are living authentically as themselves. But as you may have gleaned, this podcast is so much more than just human design. In fact, we don't go really deep into the science and system of human design because I find it's not relevant. And the world is also changing so fast. And we're entering it into an age where we don't need more information. We need more embodied leaders. We need people who are walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And so, again, I always start with human design in my practice, because before we can ever get into the body and do the deeper healing work that we spoke of so much in this episode, we first have to educate the mind. And it's just helpful to feel like we can give ourselves a permission slip for being ourselves, and to feel seen and to be validated by something. And in this case, the system of human design is just so good at that, to give us tangible and practical tools for what we can already start doing to be more in alignment with ourselves and with the version of ourselves that we came here to be, understanding from a cognitive level, like how our intuition works, how we're designed to take action, what our blind spots are. It's helpful so that we can be more targeted in our actual healing work and the transformation that has to take place in the body. And I would say 60 or 70% of the work that I'm actually doing with clients is on not just understanding yourself, but doing the work to figure out what's blocking me from actually living that. How is my nervous system actually getting in the way? And what are the stories and the limitations and the subconscious beliefs that are blocking me from living that life that I so desire, that I so yearn for, that I, hear these different people on the podcast, on social media, I see them living it, but how come I can't do it? And there's a lot of untangling that has to happen there on a really deep level. And that's what Mash, shared about in this episode of what doing 90 breath work with me and my team unlocked for her, and how it far extended beyond any other somatic modality that she had tried in the past. And then from there, what do we need to do as maintenance? What are the daily practices, habits, routines, in how can we curate your environment that is not only in alignment with your natural mechanics and your natural state, but how can we take steps to ensure that we're continuing to walk in our most authentic and aligned way? How can we set ourselves up for better success so we don't fall back into those same patterns? So that's the work that I do. Again, if you have been listening and you're feeling that call to go deeper and to explore some of these patterns that have been showing up in your life, if you're feeling the yearning to finally get to the bottom of what's keeping you from the relationships that you desire, what's keeping you from jumping off the cliff and finally committing to that new project that you've been wanting to start, or actually quitting the job that's been draining you. That is why I created this work. I've been working with clients since 2022, refining this methodology, and there's a lot of different access points. If you just want to dip your toes in and perhaps try a breathwork session, or just get a human design reading, that's a really great entry point. If you're ready to go balls to the wall and completely transform your life from the inside out, that's when my one-on-one mentorship or my retreats are a really good option. So I'll link my contact information in the show notes. And if you're not sure where to start, you're not sure what you need, I really hope that you feel comfortable reaching out, sending me a message. I want to feel like a home, a landing space for you. And there are no stupid questions. So always feel free to shoot me a message. Instagram is usually easiest. And again, just thank you all for being here. Thank you for continuing to listen. And yeah, I'll see you all on the next episode.